Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Dev Mentor Dave YouTube channel Saturday live streams. Good to see you all here. Thank you for joining me today. And 2 weeks in a row. We actually got 2 weeks in a row. Good to see. Good to be back on the channel, back live with you all, and jumping in to a topic that is a result of previous conversations. So if you've been around for a while, you've probably heard me interacting with one of our faithful members here, Ming from London, and just a lot of different issues, unfortunately, that he's had to deal with in the job search process, and so I wanted to kind of take this opportunity to talk through several different um, red flags that we can look for, and I think will be helpful. Now, is this going to solve every problem that you run into? No. Is it going to be perfect? No. Are there other things that you could probably ask? Absolutely. These are just a few that I came up with based on my experience, based on some of the things that he's experienced. And hopefully it'll be helpful to you as we go through along the way. Of course, if you're watching live, jump in the chat, say hello. Let me know where you're watching from. If you're new, if you haven't been here in a long time, like me, then jump in and say hello. And feel free to ask questions as we go throughout this too. If you have a question, put at DevMentorDave at the beginning of it. Just makes it easier for me to see those as they pop up on the chat. And we'll tackle the questions that you have, whether they're on the topic or whether they're on a different topic. That's what the Saturday live stream is for. It's not just here for me to sit and lecture or anything like that, although I will if you don't ask questions. So please jump in the chat, say hello. Feel free to talk to each other. Feel free to ask me questions, and I will try to answer them to the best of my ability, knowledge, or just opinion. So there's that. If you are watching, please hit the like button. If you are not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. We've had a drop in subscribers lately, mostly because I simply don't have a lot of content coming out like we did early on. But I am working on some new things, trying to figure out how best to manage my time so that we can get some more content out here on the channel and hopefully be helpful to you guys, not just on a Saturday live stream, but also throughout the week. So I'm thinking about potentially bringing back the LinkedIn lunch live stream on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I think that my schedule's kind of freed up a little bit during the week to be able to do that again. So that will be hopefully helpful and interesting as we look at some of the things, but I don't know when that's going to start. So don't get mad if it's not this week. All right. All right, let's jump in. Welcome, Ming. Good to see you. Thanks for jumping on. Yeah, you've definitely had a load of red flag interviews. And some of these things I think we've kind of discussed along the way, but I felt like it was a good idea to put all of these into one main live stream so we can kind of talk through all of them together. Let's see. Had another interview for a startup. Said only 3 months. Sent a live coding test, but came back and checked in after 30 minutes. Did he say anything after he checked back in? Just wondering. And that's interesting that they would do a live coding test. I think you all know I'm not a huge fan of coding tests. Of course, part of that's because I've been doing this for a long time, and at my age and knowledge, it just doesn't make sense to be doing coding tests. If you don't think that I know what I'm doing at this point, then you know I don't know what to tell you. So so for me, it's not a big deal, but I understand to some degree why they still do coding tests for junior developers, especially. Hey Mel, good to see you. Yeah, exactly. It does sound like a low effort interviewer. It's like Let me do the minimum amount of work to get through this process. And honestly, that's I think part of the problem with the interview process as a whole. And I'm actually working on some content for either a live stream, probably just a standalone video, because I think it's going to be at least impact not just developers, not just people looking for jobs, but people hiring. So there are lots of issues in the hiring realm right now here in 2025, and I think there are some solutions for them, but most people don't want to pursue those solutions. So I'm going to try to get a video together, hopefully this week, on that. So be looking for that this week. If I have time, I'll try to record it today, but we'll see. It seems like I never have time for anything, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. But I have lots of ideas. If you don't follow me on LinkedIn, check out my LinkedIn profile. I think it's in. I think the link is on the YouTube channel. Let me see. If you go to. Actually, if you go to devmentordave.com, that redirects you to the YouTube channel now. Just FYI. Yeah, my LinkedIn profile is on there. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, if you're not following me on LinkedIn, because I probably post there more than anything else. I don't really use Twitter slash X. I don't like that format. I like to write more and I don't want to pay for it. So I tend to write longer things. That's just the way that I am. I apologize. If you don't like to read longer posts, then don't follow me. But that's typically where you'll find me interacting probably more, just because it's easier to write something quickly than it is to make a video. So I don't know. We'll see. I want to get back to doing some more videos here on the channel. Kind of increase the channel, make it a little bit more useful than it has been over the last 6 months or so. So if you have topic ideas, let me know. Of course, I'm definitely using AI to help me figure out some good plans and things like that. If you saw videos from a year ago on the Dev Mentor Dave YouTube channel, you would not recognize me in my opinions of AI. I was very anti-AI, or at least not anti-AI. I was very, very slow adopting it, but I pretty much use it all day long now. So in different ways. There's good things and bad things with it. Maybe I'll do a video on that too, as far as maybe how I use AI and what are some of the best use cases for it. Not always coding, I'll tell you that. If you've watched some of our more recent live streams, you know that AI looks good at the beginning, but can really go off the rails if you're not keeping track of it. So, all right, we got some conversation going on here. Let me get caught up real fast. He said you just need to get used to cloning a repo and be quick and efficient. Oh, that's a bummer. Rude and unprofessional. Yeah, I mean, be good at cloning a repo. There's not a whole lot to that. I mean, I would like to know some more information about what he means by that. Like, it's git clone. Right? There you go. There's your repo. Yeah, Mel says, I think you dodged a terrible work environment. That's probably very true. Yeah, I think well, it's not so much, Mel, that people don't want to pursue a solution. It's that people see, now I'm giving away my plan. So I gotta be careful how I say this, right? Um, it's really not a big deal. It's probably something that most people have already thought of anyways. But people get used to life being a certain way, especially when life is easier now than it was before, right? And so if the best solution to a problem is to either go back to doing something they used to have to do, or do something that's not as easy as the way that their life currently is, that's when they really don't want the solution. Because at the end of the day, what we want solutions that are easier, that make us do less work, right? We want I think about this with my kids and like cleaning the house, right? We have our small group for church coming over, and we've got tomorrow night, and so we've got a day and a half to get the house cleaned up. And what I would prefer is to have my children um, do all the work because I don't want to clean the house up, and frankly, they're the ones that made the house a mess mostly anyway. So, but they don't always do things as efficiently or see all the things that I see that need to be done. And so I still have to do a lot of hand holding. I have to do a lot of pointing things out to get them to do to get everything that I cleaned up that I want them to have cleaned up because they're not looking at it through my eyes, right? So, my solution is for them to be clones of me, to do what I would want to do without me having to step in and tell them what to do. So we tend to want solutions that are easier and easier and easier. Which again, that's kind of why we've leaned so heavily into AI as a development world, as a development industry, is because we like the idea of something else doing the work and us just guiding it. We like the idea of just giving a big prompt and having an application get built. As a society. Now, developers may not like that as much because it feels like it's taking our jobs, but the reality is it doesn't work that way, and it doesn't work well that way, and so it's not really a true solution, but we keep pursuing it because it's the solution that we want. It's the solution not that we need. It's kind of like that phrase in The Dark Knight. He's the hero that they need right now, not the hero that they want, right? So solutions, the right solutions at times can be solutions that we don't want, but are best for us. And I think I have some ideas that are not new to the industry, but are maybe feeling like taking a step backwards in some ways to fix a lot of the problems that we're seeing in the industry. So be looking for a video on that in the coming days. No guarantee on when that will happen, but hopefully that'll be their first standalone video in a while. So share it, get it out there, make it viral. That's one thing I'm certainly not too worried about, is doing stuff that's viral. So anyway, let's see. Yeah, that's another problem, being if the CTO doesn't know what to ask you. Now, there are some instances where the CTO just may not be a technical person, and in that instance, they shouldn't be the one interviewing you, right? They should be giving you people to interview you who know the day to day, and we're going to talk about some of those types of questions here this morning as we work through some of these. I think I've got like eight or so red flags. So we'll see how many we get through. But yeah, I mean, if they don't know what to ask you, how in the world are they going to know whether or not you're a good candidate? Let's see. I think that's true. Solutions are often easily said but hard to implement. That's true, and everybody comes from their own perspective. So just because I think I have a good solutions for for fixing a lot of these problems doesn't mean it works for everybody. So, there's that. Uh, Ming says the worst interviews are when they ask you to present a presentation of their product and the type of industry they're in to show your understanding of Web3 and blockchain. Yeah, that could be frustrating, especially since you're not the one that wrote it. That is one thing I do say. You want to do some research. I think I've mentioned this before. You want to make sure that you understand the company that you're working for, what they do. The more you understand, the more you can jump in right away. But honestly, that's also part of the onboarding process. They should do that for you when you join the company. So, I don't know. I don't know how valid that is to ask an interviewer or ask an interviewee to demonstrate their knowledge of the company. Like that's part of the interview process, is learning more about the company. So I don't know. All right, if you are watching live again, feel free to jump in the chat, say hello. If you've got a question, as we're going through these red flags, feel free to ask it in the chat. type at DevMentorDave at the beginning. That'll put a little like a red tag on, or not red, yeah, red tag on it, and it just kind of helps me to see that a little bit more easily, especially since there's some conversations going back and forth in the channel, in the live stream chat. So there's that. Let's dive in. I do not have, I got lazy, so this is all just going to be me, most likely. I didn't create a PowerPoint or anything like that, so, and I didn't use AI to generate any what do you call it, presentation things. I forget, there's one that's out there that's real popular. I can't remember what it is right now, but no presentation today, unless we just want to dive into something. Somebody has a question, we can dive into something on the other screen. But hey, WebWords, good to see you. Welcome. Good to see you all today. Again, feel free to jump in if you have a question. But we're going to start talking through some red flags that and some questions that you can ask to kind of help reveal those red flags and even follow up on them. So this is more finding red flags from the perspective of the interviewee. So you are you've finally gotten an interview, if you get to that point, and then you're in the interview process, and these are things to look for, especially, again, thinking about some of the things that Ming's gone through lately, trying to find these red flags as to whether or not this company is a good company, is a real company. There's a lot of fake interviews going on out there right now in this industry. There's lots of issues, partially because of remote work, and I love working remotely, but it does present some issues when it comes to the interview process and looking for a job, and even going through the interviews. We see people cheating a lot of times in their interview process. So see, here I am getting back in that other topic. But anyway, so we want to look for some red flags to help you guys be able to see whether or not a company is a good company for you to continue pursuing during that interview process, because not every company is set up to help you succeed as a junior developer in your knowledge and your growth, in your journey as a junior developer into a mid-level developer. So we want to try to help you find some of those red flags as quickly as you can. Now, these are probably going to be more questions that you're going to ask. They might pop up if you're listening closely to how they talk about their company. Usually what happens in these interviews is they'll ask you, tell us about yourself, and then they'll tell you about the company, and then they'll ask you if you have any questions. That's just kind of a fairly normal process. Now, especially if that's a very high level interview, if it's more of a technical interview, obviously they're going to ask you technical questions. They're going to maybe take you through a live coding test like they did for this last one for Ming. But this is the opportunity, when you get the opportunity to ask questions, this is where you're going to be able to see those red flags probably the most prominently. Sometimes you can view them, you can see them while they're talking about their company and their own process, if they have a specific process that they go through. But this is your time to shine. This is your time to figure out if this company is good for you to keep pursuing. So the first red flag is, I've called it no onboarding process. And this could, every company has some onboarding process. So I use the word no because all the rest of them start with the word no. And if you know me, I like consistency and alliteration in my points. So that's why we started with no. So no onboarding process. And the question that you can ask for that, or a question that you can ask to kind of help determine that, is just asking them to describe what it looks like to onboard not just a normal developer, but to onboard a junior developer, because those can be two different things. If you're onboarding a senior level developer, there are certain expectations that you have of that developer. First of all, they've probably held a job before, so they probably understand most of the things that most companies expect of you in the onboarding process. And they expect you to get up to speed much more quickly on the job that you'll be doing, whether that's working for an agency where you're on a specific project for a specific client, or it's just getting into whatever team that you're on so that you can integrate well and start getting work done quickly. Generally, the onboarding process for a senior developer is pretty straightforward and pretty quick. There's an expectation that you should be able to start contributing to the project within the first week. We try to make sure that our senior level developers are making meaningful PRs within the first 3 days, and so that's pretty quick. That requires you to get to know the company. It requires you to get to know the project to the point where you can make a meaningful pull request. And I use that term specifically, right? We're not just talking about doing a color change on the background of a div, right? We want something that's meaningful. We want you to be able to make a change, to do a ticket that actually affects the application in some way. Now, we're not expecting them to put out a massive epic at that time and do a bunch of tickets, necessarily, but the work that they do needs to show that they understand the application, they understand the project, and they understand our process and how to move forward and make that better. That's for a senior level developer. For a junior level developer, there is just a lot more that goes into bringing you on board, and a lot of it has to do with your knowledge. A lot of it has to do with your history, your work history. So if you haven't had a job before, if this is your first job, they need to be able to understand that. They need to know how to take a junior developer from, not to use my catchphrase, but from learning to code to launching a successful career, right? Like that is the goal of the process of onboarding a junior developer, and that looks different. It has different expectations, and they should be able to verbalize that. They should be able to say, you'll come in, your first, day will be probably mostly paperwork, introduction to the company, kind of our policies, how we like to do things. Maybe day two is, maybe day one is this as well, but then you're going to start, setting up your environment. They may provide equipment, they may not provide equipment, but getting you helping you understand everything that you need to understand as far as how they do their work, if there's specific applications you need to install or use, going through requirements when it comes to how you actually what code standards you have and how you put up a PR and what that process flow looks like. So they should already know in advance and be able to describe to you that workflow of how they are taking you from either never working in tech before as a developer, or somebody who's maybe only had one or two experiences, or maybe somebody who's had poor experiences like you have, Ming. They should have a process in place and already know what that looks like. And honestly, they should know what that looks like for, like I said, for a senior developer versus a junior developer. And they should be able to explain that expectation difference. And I would even say that's a good follow-up question when they're explaining it. What is the difference in how you onboard a senior level developer and how you onboard a junior level developer? Because that's gonna tell you if they've thought through that process. And that's part of the problem, is a lot of companies have not actually thought through the process of onboarding a junior developer. They just kind of expect people to know what they're doing, especially if they've mostly worked with senior developers. They don't always have a plan. So asking them to can you describe the onboarding process specifically for junior developers, and see what kind of answer they give you. If the answer's vague and it's more like, well, we just kind of see how it goes. That's not a good answer, right? If they don't have a plan, that might be a red flag. All right. Another thing that you can do to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper is talk through some of those tools. You can ask, what specific tools or resources do you provide to junior developers? Again, a lot of times with senior developers, they already have things that they prefer, and companies oftentimes are pretty happy with letting senior developers use whatever they prefer to use, unless they just have to be very stringent for some reason. Um, but juniors don't necessarily know what is the best tool. They may have tools that are really really good tools, but the juniors never heard of it, and they may just expect people to know, oh, this is industry standard. We like to throw that term around a lot. This is industry standard, but I don't think there really is a whole lot of industry standards, to be perfectly honest with you. So looking for the red flag as far as more than really have long term. Oh, I thought you were saying it was my fault, Mel. I'm sorry. Hopefully you get. It might be my fault. Hang on. Yeah, it's saying that it's not getting a lot of stuff. Hang on 1 second. Yep, I'm having an issue on my end. Let me do this. All right, before we jump into red flag number 2, this is probably a terrible idea, but let me restart my computer real fast because I think it's on my end. Actually, it might be. No, I'm definitely losing a lot. I'm trying to remember if when I fixed this before, if I fixed it by restarting my router, if I fixed it by restarting my computer. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to try to restart my router. And I will be right back, okay? We'll leave that in the chat and pin it to the top. So hopefully, well, it says I've got a decent connection now. I don't know. All right, if it happens again, I will restart my router. So we'll remove that for now. It's still there. Okay. If we have another slowdown, I'll restart the router and see if that fixes it. But okay. Number 2, red flag number 2, no long-term expectations. So this happens to senior developers just as much as junior developers. The expectations, do they have a set of expectations, not just for week 1, right? And this is what I mean by long-term expectations. Do they have expectations not just for week 1 or week 2, but is there an expectation for 30, 60, 90 days down the road? Do they have an idea of where you should be in their process, in how they expect their developers to be able to contribute to what they're doing as a company? Excuse me. And so a question that you can ask there in order to draw out that flag is, what are those expectations? What does it look like for this role specifically? Again, it's always good to remember to draw them back into the junior developer aspect of your question, right? Because especially if they don't hire a lot of junior developers, or maybe you're the first one, it's the first junior developer job, whether that's a startup or whether that's an existing company, they need to have thought through these things so that they can provide good evaluations, right? So, and you need to draw them into the reminder that we're talking about a junior developer position. We're not talking about a senior level developer position, and make sure that their expectations meet those criteria, right? So asking, what does success look like for this role in the first 30, 60, 90, 180, whatever days, give them specific time periods and see if they've even thought about it. Obviously, a huge red flag is if they say, well, we'll just see how it goes. That's not a good answer to that question. If they have unrealistic expectations, so in the first 30 days we expect you to be up and running and managing your own features and doing it all completely autonomously, like that's a bad plan, right? Do they have a plan that makes sense for a junior developer, right? Maybe 90 days is we expect you to know the code base well enough to give you a ticket. Not that you should never have questions, but for the most part, you should be able to be doing tickets that are adding features or fixing bugs that are significant to the application. In the first 30 days, you'd probably really just want to see consistency in the ability to do the work that's assigned to you, consistency in communication if you have trouble and problems. I would want to see that from a junior developer. So we're not having big gaps in lack of communication. I want to see them communicating not just when they have problems, but communicating when things are finished, going through, following the processes and the procedures that we talked about in the onboarding process. So those are some things that would be more clear. Still a little vague because there's always an evaluation process with that, and we have to keep that in mind. But we've got to expect that they have a plan. They have some sort of way of not just evaluating you, but of expressing their expectations. If they can't express expectations for week one, for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, if they can't give you and articulate those expectations, then that's a red flag. That means they haven't thought through this process. That means they're going to evaluate you in the moment. And I think, especially for me, a lot of times this is what seems to be happening for you is you're getting evaluated in the moment when they're frustrated and when they don't have a plan and they haven't set good expectations as a measuring stick to see if you're meeting those expectations. So it's all very nebulous, it's all in their head, and it's all very in the moment is what it really seems like a lot of times with some of the situations that you've been in. So kind of a good response is from them would be something like, we expect you to understand the code base in the first 30 days, be able to answer basic questions about that. Maybe a good follow-up question is, how do you measure performance for junior developers in the early stages? Is it based off of tickets? Is it based off of how many times I ask questions? What is the criteria that they're going to use to evaluate you? Is it based off of how many times I had to leave work early because I had a family issue? That's a real thing, right? Sometimes companies, I've mentioned before that I used to work for a company years ago when I would have considered myself still a junior developer. My first job, I was let go from that job because of the expectations and the assumptions of the owner of the company. I would come in early in the morning. I was one of the first people into the office. I would actually clean the office coffee machine in the morning. They had a little cleaning cycle thing. It was kind of cool, but I would do that every morning. I was almost always in the office. It was a 45-minute drive for me. And I was almost always in the office. I was almost always one of the first people in the office, even before the owner. And I would leave generally around 3:30. And the company had a work from home policy. Technically, I didn't have to come in every day. According to the actual policy of the company, I could work from home as long as my manager was okay with it, and B, I could go home early and work from home as long as my manager was okay with it. And my manager was okay with it. So I would usually leave at 3:30, which really was most of a day anyway, because I was in around 7. So I would leave after, 8-ish hours, 7 to 8 hours of work, and go home. And oftentimes I would work even from home in the evenings trying to get things done because we were constantly behind because I was the only developer working on it. And I found out later, they didn't tell me this obviously when they let me go because nobody wants to tell you why they let you go because it's a liability. But I found out later that the reason I was let go was because at 4 o'clock, the owner would walk around the office and see who was there and who wasn't there. And because I would leave earlier than he would do that, he assumed that I wasn't working. Doesn't matter what my manager told him. He just assumed that I was sloughing off, that I wasn't doing my job, and I wasn't giving everything to the company, and so they let me go. And it was a poor assumption based on a bad evaluation process that didn't even follow their own rules. So that's kind of a hard thing because they actually had rules, they had expectations, but at the end of the day, they didn't follow them. And so we do have to remember that just because they might have all the right answers to these questions doesn't mean that they're going to perfectly follow them. So you still may run into bad companies and bad actors who don't follow their own processes and procedures. But hopefully, if you're getting the right answers to these questions, you'll have the ability to see some of these red flags. All right, let's see. Got a question here from Mel. If a company is a startup that doesn't have a plan like that, is it possible for someone newly hired to draw up a document for the expectations and hiring practices for the next person? They need to do that, quite frankly. In fact, if I were doing a startup and I were hiring, I would want to bring in someone. If I didn't have those capabilities, I would hire a senior level developer that had project management background and make sure that they help me walk through that process. Because if I don't know how to create those documents, I need somebody who does. Or maybe I just hire somebody on a short-term basis, to help me do that. Or in this day and age, just go to AI and, LLM, pull up Claude or Grok or ChatGPT or something like that and ask it to help you draw something up. Like, in my opinion, in this day and age, with all the tools that we have, there is zero excuse outside of ignorance for a company to not have an onboarding plan, for a company to not be able to give you some realistic long-term expectations. That's huge. And it should be fairly straightforward and simple in this day and age. So no, I don't think that's rude, Mel. I think if you are the person getting hired on, I think you should be helping the company. So this is one of my opinions that I am feel very strongly about. Um, Being a developer is a job that you really shouldn't assume is just a job. So being a developer, there's so much that goes into what we do that affects the profitability, that affects the long term um, stick to itiveness of the company, right? The success of the company. That's the word I was going for. Um, if we don't do our job well, the company is not going to succeed. And because the products that we put out are based on us. So if the company doesn't have the right things to help us succeed in these areas, then we need to be, if we do take on that job, we need to have a plan to help the company be better, a plan to help the company be successful, do things well. And if you're that type of person, you need to make that clear in your interview process. That you are a process person, that you are somebody who wants to help the company solidify some of these things, especially if you're asking these questions and they don't have answers to them. I think it's okay. In my opinion, I would appreciate someone saying, it seems like you don't really have a good plan for that. If you were to hire me, I think that's something that I would like to help out with as well, is making sure that we have a solid onboarding process, make sure that we have a solid long-term set of expectations for the different types of roles that we're going to be hiring for. Like, having somebody come in and show, even in the interview, that they're recognizing areas the company needs to grow and improve and they know how to do that, like, that's somebody that I want on my team. I want somebody who can see that and can help me make the company successful. So if somebody gets offended by that, that's not somebody you want to work for, because they're just egotistical at that point. They're not looking to have help. They're looking to just get what they want out of you, and that's not a person that you want to work for. So asking how they measure the performance of junior developers, again, always bring it back to junior developers if that's what you're being hired for. If you're being hired for a senior developer role, I know we have people that watch this that aren't just junior developers, then make sure that you're asking about the role that you are being hired for, that you're being interviewed for. All right. So those are first two red flags. We've already been on here for almost 45 minutes. We'll see if we get through all the rest of them. Red flag number 3 is no growth plan. No growth plan. And of course, you can probably, as I state these, you can probably think of the questions on your own. But again, a good question is, how does the team support, again, junior developers in learning and growth? How does the team support junior developers in learning and growth? Do they just give you access to some sort of learning platform and say, hey, get better, right? That's nice, especially if the company is paying for it. It's nice for them to give you some assistance there in a third party tool. That's not wrong or bad, but if that is their idea of growth and learning without their team being involved in that, I think that's a really important part of this question. How does the team support junior developers? It's not just about what tools do you give me, but how do you as a team interact? And again, this is one of the reasons why I don't always recommend that junior developers jump into startups, especially very small startups, because there's typically not a team of developers. There may be one or two, and if there's that few developers, then they're probably very heavily focused on getting features out, and more so than helping you learn and grow. I generally prefer junior developers join existing companies that have been around for a while, that already have processes in place. Again, that's why some of these questions are probably going to keep you from jumping into a startup because of that. A lot of times startups just haven't thought through these things. Sometimes startups are developed by serial entrepreneurs, and they've done it before. They know how to do some of these things, and that's great. But a lot of startups get funding because they do a quick proof of concept, and they really don't know how to run a business necessarily, and so or even run a dev team necessarily, especially if it's something that somebody just kind of created on their own. So that's why I don't really recommend most of the time junior devs jumping into startups. Doesn't mean you can't. Doesn't mean you can't find a good one. So obviously take that with a grain of salt. But I think a lot of the problems that we see that we're talking about here with red flags are really, really evident in startups. And one of those is not having a growth plan. Part of the reason for that is a startup doesn't necessarily know how long it's going to be in existence, right? But if you're working for an established company, they've been around a while. Hopefully they have some sort of growth plans. They have some sort of process for senior developers to interact with junior developers. If they come back and they just say, we expect you to learn independently, that's a red flag, right? That means that they don't really have a growth plan. Even if they give you, access to Udemy or Pluralsight or something like that, where you can, or Laracast, or, any one of those learning training platforms, those are nice. But if they don't have any structure or plan for the team to be available to help you grow and learn the things that you need to along the way, that is a huge red flag. And I think it's good to ask for examples. A good follow-up question is, can you give me an example of how a junior dev grew in your team recently? If this is something that company does frequently, they hire junior devs on a regular basis, they should be able to tell you about somebody who came in as a junior dev and they worked through their process, and at the end of a year, this is what it looked like for them. They were an integral part of this team, or we were able to hand off this piece of work to them, or this feature to them completely. Like, they should be able to articulate what it looked like for a junior developer to be successful, and what it looked like for others to come alongside and help them in that process. So if they haven't had any junior developers successfully transition into a good full-time role, that's a red flag, right? They're not helping them go through that process. There isn't a growth plan for them, and they're not transitioning. That is one of the problems in the industry, especially when it comes to junior developers, is a lot of people, a lot of companies will hire, and this is more, what I would call disreputable companies, but a lot of these disreputable companies will hire junior developers because they're cheaper, burn them out, and then throw them out on the trash heap. And unfortunately, that happens a lot more than people want to admit. And so if you're dealing with a company and they don't have a good example of sorry, I just got a text from my mother-in-law. So if they don't have a good example of somebody going through that process and how they helped them go through that process, if their example is we had this really awesome junior dev and he just figured everything out and learned everything on his, like, that's not the answer to the question. I want to know how your team supported that junior developer in the process, right? So flag number 3 is no growth plan. Flag number 4, we'll get to in just a second. I think there's another question here. Mel says, don't use AI to draw up the expectations. It uses way too many buzzwords. And if no real person in the company has thought about expectations, the document means nothing. That is true. Always, whether you're using AI to write code, whether you're using AI to write documentation, create expectations, all of that needs to go through the filter of a human being. Because again, it may be good, it may sound good, but it may not apply to your specific situation. It may be too general. You might need to add content to it. It might be too verbose where you need to remove stuff from it because it's just way too wordy and doesn't make sense. I think if you use LLMs specifically a lot, you can train it to be a little bit better, but you absolutely have to go through the process of checking it and evaluating it and making sure that it fits what you're doing. So don't throw AI out with the bathwater, Mel, but you definitely do want to make sure you're putting effort into to make sure that the document is still yours, right? To make sure that you've looked through it, you've approved the content in it, and you've made sure that it fits your specific scenario as well. Some of that can come with prompting, better prompting as well. Let's see. Yeah, it can take away some of the thinking, although honestly, sometimes it can add to the thinking. There's oftentimes where I'll be talking through to an LLM and giving it what I want to do, and it will offer suggestions that I hadn't thought about that actually make sense. So again, don't completely ignore it until you and think it's totally bad, right? Um, Ming says, should there be a ramp up time for any level, regardless of seniority? Yes, there should, but that ramp up time is going to look different, and the company should be able to give you uh, different expectations for those different roles. And I think it's fair as a junior developer to in the interview ask what's the difference between ramping up a senior developer and a junior developer. If there is no difference, that's a problem, right? They should be able to articulate that there's a difference in that process of ramping you up and bringing you on board, not just from a company knowledge based standpoint, but from an expectation of what you can do and how you can benefit the company moving forward. I mean, yeah, if he says there's no ramp up time except for juniors, like, what does he mean by that? So when you say no ramp up time, what does that look like? Describe for me what the expectations are and the timeline of those expectations if you don't have a ramp up time for senior devs, and what's the difference between that and what you expect out of junior devs, right? So it's coming back to what are those expectations? Why do you use the term there's no ramp up time, right? Or there is ramp up time? Like, what do you mean by ramp up time? Having those follow up questions. And again, I know when you're in the interview process, it's hard to think about those things sometimes, but listening to what they're saying and making sure that you have all the information you need from what they said. And if you don't, if they say something that's vague, ask them to explain it, ask them to describe it, ask them to clarify what that means to them and what that means for the specific role that you're interviewing for, right? That is true. Juniors in every company are different. Most of them want a junior or a mid, and that is an issue. Obviously, every company wants to get the most for the least, right? They want to pay the least amount of money to get the most productivity and knowledge from the person that they're hiring. So everybody wants a mid-level developer for a junior level price. Um, and I think it's fair to ask if they think the expectations are fair for somebody that's a junior level developer, especially after you hear them. And because here's the thing, if you hear expectations that are not good expectations for a junior level developer, you're probably not going to take the job even if they offer it to you, or you probably shouldn't take the job. So if you hit that point, I don't think it's wrong to share your opinion, to be like, it sounds like, and again, do this professionally, but you could say something like, it sounds like some of the expectations you have are really more for a mid-level developer, somebody who's maybe had a job or two before, or somebody who's been doing this and learning it a lot longer, maybe has had some freelance experience, um, and even ask if they would consider changing some of their expectations for somebody who is a true junior level developer who's looking to grow into a mid-level. Like you can kind of rephrase, you can state those things in questions that are not as angry or accusatory, right? You can state those in questions to see if they've thought about that, if they'd reconsider some of the things that they've even said. So those are some ways maybe to kind of deal with something like that. And you never know, when you ask some of those clarifying questions, or even poking questions a little bit around their process and expectations, it may cause them to change their expectations. And I would definitely want that to be verbalized if they change their expectations to try to hire you. I'd want to make sure that was very clear from the beginning what those new expectations are, though. Okay, let's see. Anything else here? Yeah, Mel, it's a prompting skill issue. You just need to get better at dealing with AI and giving it the context that it needs so you get what you want. All right, red flag number 4. We're almost halfway through, which is good because we're only an hour in, almost. All right. So red flag number 4 is no hard stop working environment. No hard stop working environment. And what do I mean by that? I mean, kind of like I just described a few minutes ago with my first job. Like, there were expectations that I would be there from specific times, right? That I would be there at 4 o'clock or after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. But I was putting in more hours every day that were not being taken into account, right? And really that wasn't fair to me as a developer, especially as a junior developer, but that wasn't fair to me as a senior developer to A, not know the amount of time that I'm putting in, and B, not give me a hard stop environment. The expectation, if I was expected to be there till 4, the expectation should have been, when you leave, you're done. There times where you might need to actually, work from home, work extra. You got to put in 10 hours, 12 hours today because we've got something big coming up and we're just behind and we really need the effort. That happens. That's life. That's okay. But the expectation should be, you work this period of time, whether that's daily or weekly, or the expectation is you get this amount of work done, right? There should be a stopping point where if you've done this, if you've accomplished this, usually it's going to be hours, but if you've worked this number of hours, it's time to stop. That doesn't mean that you can't go home and do your own learning and work on your own side project, things like that. But for the company, there needs to be a hard stop environment. There needs to be a willingness for you to not be working, to not be contacted, and especially for junior developers, right? Sometimes there's that expectation that they can just kind of use you up and spit you out because there's 1,000 developers out there looking for a job, and that's really not fair, right? So you could ask something like, what's the typical workload and work-life balance for a junior developer, right? What's again kind of back to expectations. What does it look like? What's the workload that you're expecting from a junior developer on a day-to-day basis? And maybe that's a certain number of tickets. Maybe that's a certain number of hours. Again, there's lots of different ways that you can evaluate that they can evaluate that, but they need to be able to tell you this is enough. As a junior developer, you need to be able to get this done during a week. And again, there might be a ramp up process to that. By 30 days, this is what this expectation is, and we do not expect you to keep working after that. I try to make that very clear. Again, we don't hire junior level developers, but we do have some what I would call probably mid-level to upper mid-level developers that work for us. And especially early on, there's a tendency to overwork because you're trying to prove yourself to the company. And one of the things that I tell them and almost every new hire is, we expect you to put in 40 hours a week. And if you're putting in more than 40 hours a week, you need to be reporting that to us, because we want to make sure that we're managing your time well, and we want to make sure that we're managing your effort well. We want to make sure that we're not burning you out. When you put in more than the expected time in a week, that can cause issues with expectations of clients. It can cause issues with your expectations of your job, expectations from your manager. If I know you get this amount of work done every week, but I don't know you're actually working 60 hours instead of 40 hours, that changes what I can expect for you to do if you start working the 40 hours that I expected, right? So you need to work for a company that sets those expectations and even pushes you to adhere to those expectations. A lot of companies will be like, we only, we want to have a good work-life balance, and so we only expect you to work 40 hours a week. Wink, wink, right? But if you put in more than that, we really appreciate it, right? That's not a company that you want to work for. It's, that especially as most of you are probably looking for a salary job. If it's hourly and they're willing to pay you for the extra time, I guess that's okay. But if you're salaried, they should be giving you a hard stop. They should be able to express to you what it looks like to have a standard workload, what they expect from you, from an availability standpoint. We typically want people to be available during the majority of working hours here in the middle of the United States. So from like 9 to 3, now they need to work all the hours that they should be working. But as far as communication is concerned, availability for meetings, things like that, we want people to make sure that they're available from, 9 to 3. And availability doesn't necessarily mean that you're actually working specifically that whole time. Maybe you're a night owl. I've had people work for me who just work better at night. And so they were available during the day if they needed to jump on a call or something like that. They were generally available, but most of their actual working hours were put in, from like 3 in the afternoon till, 10 o'clock at night. Right. So we made some concessions for that, but we also made sure that they understood we have a hard stop. We do not want you working more than X number of hours on a normal regular basis. Right. So, it kind of a good follow-up to that. Especially if they just give you kind of a vague, well, we expect you to put in X number of hours. I think it's good to kind of follow up and ask, how often do developers tend to work nights and weekends, right? Especially junior level developers, does it happen very often? Because again, a company who's being real and honest with you should admit that it does happen, because it does happen. There are times where people work nights and weekends, and they should be able to express that in reality. And I'm happy to say that 95% of the time people are working nights and weekends, it's because they've chosen to do that, not because we've asked them to do that. But there are times here and there where we might have a demo or something for a client. And so we need to put in a few extra hours or tweak some things over the weekend because something is happening on Monday, that we need to be prepared for. And that happens. Sometimes it happens because it wasn't planned and this just popped up on the calendar. We've got to take care of it, but that should not be the norm. They should be a company who typically has a hard stop working environment. So that is red flag number 4. If they can't give you a good answer to that, there's a good chance you're going to be burned out working for that company. We got a few more people in here now. So don't forget, if you are asking a question or want to get a hold of me, type at DevMentorDave at the beginning of it. That just gives me a little red box with my name. It's a little bit easier for me to see in the chat if you're talking to me or if you're talking to others or if you're just leaving a comment for fun. So let me know if you have something specifically for me. Okay, CW, welcome. He says dev jobs are always using milestones as hard stops. How do we use time as a hard stop? So the way to do that is to get better at estimating. If you are working on a milestone, hopefully your milestone is made up of multiple tickets. And you should be estimating how long that milestone is going to take, right? So if that milestone is a 1-month milestone, then you should be able to kind of work backwards from there. Okay, how many tickets do we need for this milestone? Obviously, tickets get created along the way as well as part of the process, so you're not going to be perfect at this. But how many tickets do we have in order to reach this milestone? What's the level of difficulty? Try to figure out how long it's going to take probably to do these tickets. And I know we've got 1,000 different ways for people to do estimates. You've got t-shirt sizing and Fibonacci sequences and time bound requirements. And the reality is estimations, no matter what system you use, get more accurate over time as you use them, if you're doing it consistently and you're doing it honestly. So as far as doing hard stop, now you've got to evaluate, okay, here's our milestone. It needs to be done in a month. We've got all these tickets. We have this number of developers. This is how long we think the tickets are going to take. We've got all these hours. We've got 2 developers and we've got, so that's 80 hours a week times 4 is what, 320 hours. So we've got 320 hours and we've got 600 hours worth of tickets. That's not going to work, right? So you should be able to, because then basically you're saying you guys need to work, 14-hour days in order to get this done. And if you can't break that down at least into a general estimate, then you shouldn't be giving a time frame for the milestone to be done because you haven't done the work to figure out what it's going to take to get there. And if the client is driving that and they're not willing to concede in that requirement, then that this is either going to be a season where you're going to work a lot, or this is not the type of company that you're going to want to work for. Because if this is a consistent thing and it's always milestones and they're always unrealistic dates because they can't figure out how to manage time well, then you're not going to get a hard stop. Milestones without good estimation creates a non-hard stop work environment. And that's probably another good question to ask. How do you handle your hard stops? If it's not time based, if it's milestone based, how do you handle your evaluations, your estimations of the work that needs to go into that specific milestone? So that's something that a lead developer or whoever's doing your estimating of your tickets, they need to be able to answer that question. They need to be able to be honest with how long something is probably going to take. Estimations are almost never perfectly accurate. Usually they're lower than they should be. But over time, you should get better at knowing how long it takes to do certain types of things. Thinking through what all is going to be necessary for a ticket. I'm not necessarily a huge fan of following all of the agile Scrum processes. I think there's a lot of bloat in that. But in order to move from a milestone to a time-based hard stop, you have to be able to evaluate the work. And if you can't evaluate the work and give good time estimates on it, not necessarily that you're telling the client the time estimates, but just internally, if you can't figure out generally how difficult something's going to be and how long it probably is going to take you, then you can't build a work environment that is a hard stop based on time. So you have to think in terms of time in order to manage your time. And I know that we live in an industry that is largely trying to move away from time, but time is what we work in. We work in time and we work in expectations, and those two things have to match. So I don't know if that really fully answers your question, CW, but that to me that's the only way that you can do it, to move from milestones as stops, because really a milestone isn't a stop. When it comes to work-life balance, when it comes to not burning yourself out, a milestone is not really a stop. It's not a hard stop. It's just it's the end of that piece of work, and then they have another milestone for you to do. It's not like, I have never been in a company where you hit this milestone, then you get a week off. Right? I maybe they're out there, I don't know, but I've never worked in a company that handled milestones with true hard stops after them. And I think that's the only way that you could do it is, hey, we're going to work our tails off for however long it takes us over for the next month to get this milestone out. And after that, we're going to take 2-3 days off to give everybody the ability to recharge, or a week off to give everybody the ability to recharge, because we're going to be putting in 60-70 hours a week for 4 weeks straight, right? So, and that's that question. Okay, if you do it by milestones, how do you mitigate burnout in that process? So that's how you it's another kind of follow-up question, if that's the way that they describe the hard work stop. That's a good way for them to know whether they're just giving you an answer that they think will make sense, or whether they actually have a plan. I would not be opposed personally to having my developers work really, really hard for 2, 3, 4 weeks and giving them several days off completely, because of the expectations, because of the strain that happens to them in that process. So I don't know. Let me know, CW, if that makes sense. You've had a follow-up. It's hard to use time as a measure. If the job takes more than the expected time, it's your fault for being inefficient. I would say if somebody's saying that you're being inefficient and they're only doing that based off of your estimation, then they don't understand estimation. An estimate is a guess. Now, that's an educated guess, hopefully, but an estimate is literally an estimate. It's not a guarantee. So if somebody is judging your success by whether or not you hit an estimated time frame, then they're not doing a very good job of evaluating your progress, because they're not looking at what you did. They're also not looking at how much effort you put into that. Let's say you went over. You said it's going to take 2 weeks, and it took 3 weeks. And they say, why did it take a week longer? And you have multiple reasons why it took a week longer. Things that you didn't know were going to be problems, and that popped up along the way. If you were working 70 hours a week for those 3 weeks, that should come out. You should say, well, I thought this was going to be a lot easier, but even though it took me a week longer, I was actually working even more than just 40 hours a week in those 3 weeks. Like there are going to be reasons why it took longer than your estimate. It could be you're just like, it was not a good estimate. I thought I didn't figure it out very well. And in that instance, okay, there's some ownership, but that should be a learning experience, especially as a junior developer. Like, poor estimation should not be a way of evaluating your growth or evaluating your success. It can be a way of evaluating your growth, where you are getting better and better and better at estimating over time. because it's part of the growth process, learning to estimate your work based on time, because again, we are time bound people. Things happen in time. And so as much as we want to try to get away from that, it is a reality in which we live. We only have 24 hours in a day. We only have a certain amount of energy in a day. We can only go for a certain period of time without crashing. Like, time is a reality in which we live. And so to say that we can't use that as the estimate, or that we can't hard stop based on that, is just not recognizing the reality of life, in my opinion. So climb down off of my soapbox there for a second. hopefully that answers your question, CW. Life of Dan. This gets very complicated working overseas jobs with competing time zones. I start getting phone calls primarily from 6 p.m. onwards. I stop taking calls after 11 p.m. Yeah, and again, that's where those expectations come in, right? What are the expectations? One of my clients has people who work for them in other parts of the world, and they are required to be on certain calls that I'm on, and it's in the middle of the night where they are. But that was an expectation that was set ahead of time, that they were going to need to be available. Now, I know that they actually do the work during their times, but they're available during other times. And sometimes that's a give and take, right? That's a give and take between the company, the leadership, and the developers, the workers, right? And that's something that you need to ask. That's a good question. You know, you're hiring somebody overseas. What is that? What are the expectations of availability? You know, what is a hard stop for you? Do you expect me to work 60 hours a week, 10 hours a day? Because maybe, you know, especially if you're working with somebody overseas who is much less expensive than somebody in the United States, companies are willing to pay you for more hours to get more done, right? Because it's cheaper than a lot of times people here in the United States. So there might be an expectation that you're going to work more hours. That needs to be clearly identified, and you need to be okay with that. So if they don't have a plan in place, either you need to help them make that plan and adhere to that plan, and even potentially put it in hiring documents and things like that, or that's a big red flag that you just need to walk away from. So sorry, Mel. Hopefully you get a little bit better streaming moving forward, and you can come back and watch it later. But good to see you. All right, flag number 5. I hope we get through all 8 of these. I don't know. We'll see. We're only halfway through. Flag number 5 is no defined role. No defined role. Again, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier around companies want to hire a mid-level developer at a junior level developer price. And so we need to be very clear that they can articulate what that role means. So for example, you might ask the question, can you walk me through what the tech stack is and what your expectations are for me in that tech stack, right? So maybe they want junior developers only developing front end. That would be a good, clear expectation. Our expectation for junior developers, they're going to come in, they're going to work mostly on the front end. They're going to be building out React components. They're going to be building out Vue components, or, you know, whatever else, Livewire components, you know, whatever it is. So they're going to be focused on doing these specific types of tasks. This is what we expect from our junior developers. And even, you know, follow that up with, what does it look like for a mid-level developer and a senior level developer? What are the expectations? What does that role mean to you when it comes to the work that you're doing? Maybe it's a back-end junior dev role, and what we generally have you do there is working on API implementations. All right, we don't want you messing necessarily with the database queries, because that gets really complex for the project that we're working on. But we want you to be able to set up all of our REST APIs, you know, and get those connected to our controllers, or however that's all set up. for the thing, but they need to be able to clearly articulate what it is they want you to do. You know, if they come back and they're like, well, you just kind of do a little bit of everything, that's not a plan. That's not a role, right? A role should be clearly defined and tell you these are the things that you're going to work on. And as you grow, as you go from junior to mid-level, these are some of the areas we're going to ask you to kind of move into over time. So giving you that career path and expectations along the way there. But what does it look like for me to work in that? You know, if they come up with some weird expectations like we expect you to manage all of our DevOps, that's not a good thing for a junior level developer to do unless you're literally coming in as a DevOps engineer, junior level. Like most companies don't have DevOps engineers, honestly, especially smaller ones, which most companies are. That's just kind of put on the backs of the developers oftentimes. But you know, if they give you, you know, you're going to run our Kubernetes, you know, cluster, probably not the thing that you're going to want to hand to a junior level developer. So obviously there's going to be things, if they come up with something that's completely off the wall, or if they don't have an answer, those are red flags, right? They don't truly understand what is a good level of knowledge and work for a junior level developer. And you know, from a green flag standpoint, if they can articulate the junior and the mid and the senior and articulate a career path for you moving from one role to another, that's usually a really good sign that they know what they're doing and they know what they expect out of you and they know what that role means. Again, as was stated earlier, so many companies, what they really want is a mid-level developer at a junior level developer price, and you need to be able to extract that from them, and having them define the role in the terms of the expectations, in the terms of what aspects of the applications they expect you to work on, what types of features they expect you to do, the level of tickets. There may be, they may say, you know, we don't give you, let's use Fibonacci. Well, we don't give you anything greater than a 3. So it'd be a 1, 2, or a 3 ticket that you're going to get. Anything that's a 5 or above, that's not going to be something that you'll do. That'll be a mid-level or senior level developer will take care of the 5s and the 8s. Depending on your company, that may be too big anyway. But there should be some sort of like clarity in the process of how they designate the work that goes to you. I don't always make this clear, but even the people that I work with and that I manage, I have a decent idea of where they're at, what they're good at, and I will push people and stretch them, but I want them to be successful and I want to use them as successfully as I can. So I want to make sure that I'm giving them tasks that make the most sense for them to work on. And I work with some really great developers, and they typically take it on and they knock it out of the park, and do a really great job. I actually had one of those mid-level developers, I would call them, and I gave him kind of a little bit more of a vague task, and he nailed it. And he went above and beyond what I was even envisioning for the feature that he developed, and it was really actually very cool. So sometimes you do have to be given some things to stretch you and push you to do a little bit more on your end, but that should be part of that growth process, and they should be able to articulate what that looks like and what those expectations, what that role of junior developer actually means to them, in terms of what you'll be doing, what you'll be working with. And I think a good follow-up to that, you know, if they do mention specific tools or languages or whatever that you're not familiar with, asking, what is the ramp-up time on that? Will there be resources to help me learn that? Will there be people available to help me jump into that, since that's something that maybe I don't know so much about as a junior level developer? You know, will you help me get to that point to be able to do that, since that's part of what you have defined as the role for this junior developer role? So they need to have a defined, a clear understanding and definition of the role. If they don't have that, that is a red flag. All right, number 6. Number 6 is no planned feedback process. No planned feedback process. So basically, the question is, how do you, as a company, or as a manager, depending on what does it look like, basically, to provide feedback, whether that's kind of one-on-one ad hoc feedback, or what does a performance review look like for junior developers, and this could be, more for new hires, because maybe they have a specific process that's for new hires and then it changes, the longer you've been there. Or specifically, again, we want to keep this around the role specific questions. So what does that feedback process and performance evaluation process look like for junior level developers? They This is where some of those problems come in for me, especially. If there isn't a good formal process and plan, then it's just going to be an ad hoc, off the cuff decision of whether or not you're meeting expectations right now. If they don't have a way of going through and evaluating how have you progressed, then everything's going to be reliant on what's happening now. It's kind of like the what have you done for me lately question, right? And if they cannot articulate a process, maybe it's not a very, very robust process, but if they have a process, that's at least a yellow flag, not a red flag. But if they can articulate some process, that's helpful. But is there a process for interacting with you and providing feedback to you and receiving feedback from you? One of the things that, this is a shame on me, but one of the things that I've recently instituted with the people that work with me is one-on-ones. And I shouldn't have named them one-on-ones because that always has a bad connotation. Like it's just going to be an evaluation. But really, for me, it's an opportunity for me to give feedback if I have any feedback, but it's also an opportunity for them to ask questions. It's an opportunity for them to give feedback about how we're doing things, things that we can do better. That's what I set those up for. It's a standardized, open line of communication, two-way communication. That's the goal of what I call our one-on-ones. And I didn't have a plan for that before, and that's a bad thing. All right, you need to have a plan, and it needs to be followed. Right, so I have it basically every 2 weeks. I meet with each of those individuals for up to 30 minutes, and that gives me an opportunity. Sometimes we talk about work, sometimes we talk about life, because life affects work and work affects life. And as much as we try to keep those separate, we want to have that hard stop that we talked about before. As much as we try to keep those separate, they're still going to bleed over. They're going to impact each other. For example, we had somebody recently get married, and so they were gone on a honeymoon for a week. That has an impact on the work that needs to be done. And so, that needs to be communicated ahead of time, which it was, and it worked out perfectly fine. But, those types of things can come up in those types of environments where there is a freedom to give feedback, and there's a willingness to receive feedback. And what's interesting to me is a lot of junior developers that I've talked to and that I've worked with, they want feedback. But companies are not very good oftentimes at giving it, or they give it at the wrong time. This is why, again, I would prefer a scheduled time of feedback, so that the feedback that's being given to you is not always just in the moment, in the middle of an issue, in the middle of a problem. They need to be able to articulate some form of planned feedback over time that is consistent, that gives you a way of knowing, am I following the path that you want me to? That isn't, I've had managers before where the one-on-one was just like, hey, I don't really have anything new for you. Do you got anything? No. 5 minutes later, we're done. I'm not saying that can't happen, but if that's, if there is not a plan, if there's not a purpose in that one-on-one time or in that feedback loop, whatever that looks like, then they need to be able to articulate what that looks like. They need to be able to articulate what they expect from you in response to that feedback. Do they have growth plans? Do they have, if you're not meeting expectations, do they have a process in that feedback to help you grow. You know, what does that look like as far as communication? Because really that's what it is. At the end of the day, feedback is just communication. It's an opportunity for you to communicate with them to communicate with you. And that communication builds familiarity. That communication builds a teamwork aspect into this. The better I know the people working for me, and the better I relate to the people working for me, you know, when we do have a weekend that we've got to work because, you know, something came up and I have a good relationship and we've been able to give feedback back and forth, they're going to respond much more differently to having to work that weekend than they will if I don't have any relationship with them, and then all of a sudden out of the blue I'm coming to them being like, hey, I need you to work this weekend because we've got to get this feature out. There's a totally different relationship there, and I think feedback helps us build those relationships. If it's done well and if it's done consistently, helps us build those relationships so that we can go through the hard times and the difficult times together, and we can go through the fun times and the easy times together and enjoy it all as a team. So if they don't have some sort of planned feedback process, it doesn't necessarily have to be super verbose, but if they don't have any sort of plan in how they provide feedback, you know, if they just say, we'll let you know if there's a problem, that's a red flag. Okay, so red flag number 6, no planned feedback project. Process. Red flag number 7, I marked this as no long-term loyalty. No long-term loyalty. And I think you can kind of get at this question. Now, they may not answer this question. I'll just be perfectly honest with you. They may not answer this, but I think it's fair to ask what the turnover rate is for junior developers. Again, role specific. What's the turnover rate for junior developers at their company? And again, this is a question you may not get this answer. You may have to try to do some research on the side. It's hard because honestly, most people who are posting things about a former employer online are posting them because they're unhappy, not because they were happy. If they're a former employer, there's a reason for that. But if you can find people to talk to who have worked there before, maybe find out, you know, what were some of the issues they dealt with. But if you can, see if the company will tell you. Well, we've gone through 5 junior developers in the last year. How many people are on your team? 3. You know, that's a bad thing, right? Most of the time, if they have problems with long-term loyalty, they are not going to answer that question. Let's just be fair, right? If they have junior developers who typically the average junior developer stays with them and progresses from junior to mid-level in 2 years, like that's something that is a selling point for them. So they're going to want to answer that question. They're going to want to encourage you that this is a place where people like to stay. This is a place where people like to contribute long term, where people are loyal. And so if that is a reality, they're going to want to share that. So I think it's very fair to ask what your turnover rate is, because a company that doesn't have a very high turnover rate is going to tell you. And because they want people who are going to be loyal to them. And so they want to make sure and emphasize if people tend to be loyal to them, that means they're doing something right as a company, most likely. And so that's a good stat. So this is why it's a red flag. If they don't have an answer, or if they say, you know, we don't really track that, that's not really a good flag either. If they say they don't track it and they're a massive company, I could maybe see that, but if you're dealing with an actual like hiring manager, you're dealing with a lead or somebody like that, or a director like me that is in the day to day, they're gonna know if most of their juniors are staying on long term. They're gonna know if they're generally successful at hiring junior developers, and they should be able to have some answer. If their answer is we don't track that, if their answer is we don't really have that information, or we don't answer that question, those are red flags, right? If you really want to push this, if they give you a good answer, maybe a good follow up would be, is there anybody, is there anybody who is no longer working for you that started as a junior dev that you would offer as a reference that I could talk to? That is something I don't think I've ever heard anybody ask, but I think it's a really fair question. If I've had junior developers that have worked with me, well, for example, the first two junior devs that I really spent time mentoring as part of my job, I would send anybody who was looking to work with me as a mentor or work with me, work under me at a job. I would happily send them to either one of those gentlemen because we had a good relationship, and I watched them grow and be successful. And both of them are working for other companies now, and I'm working for a different company now too. But I was able to see them grow from junior level to mid level developer in a year's time, right? So I was able to see them be successful, and I know through conversations with them that they appreciate the input that I've had in that process. And so I have no problem saying, hey, go talk to this guy or go talk to this guy. They were successful in the process that we implemented. So so if they have long-term loyalty in their junior developers, and they have junior developers who've moved through a process, they should be excited to share that information with you and maybe even let you talk to them. So now sometimes they'll, you have to be careful with this too. They can kind of poison the well a little bit, right? One of the companies that I worked for as a contractor years ago, I actually asked this question. I said, "Can I talk to somebody who?" Because one of the things that I had heard is they don't like to move you from contractor to full-time developer, because typically it was a 6-month to perm process. That's how it was sold to us. It's a 6-month to perm hiring process. And so I asked, is there anybody that I can talk to that used to be temp that is now permanent? And they actually did send me to somebody. And I'll just be honest with you, about half of the things that this person told me ended up not actually being true about the company that I was working for. So sometimes they can poison the well a little bit and give you somebody who's willing to lie to your face. But at least you did your best to suss out whether or not that is a red flag for them. Again, you can't help it if somebody lies to you, but these are red flags that can pop up. Okay, last one. Hey, we got the last one. We're still just under 2 hours. So there's some more comments here. Let me see. CW says, I'm missing several things here. CW says, feedback always meant judgment day. Nobody likes to be called in for a one-on-one in a meeting room because they kind of know what's up. Yeah, and that's why, again, I made it very clear as to why I was setting up these one-on-ones, what my expectations were. Again, it goes back to communication, right? What were the expectations of the one-on-ones? What my desire was for the one-on-ones, the fact that it was scheduled, it's on the calendar, it's not something that's just a random thing that pops up. Hey, we need to talk. That's never a good thing. So, well, sometimes it is. Sometimes I'll give good news that way, just to make people go a little crazy. Which is really mean. But I mean, how else are you gonna do that if it's just good news that you need to share? But anyway, beside the point. I try to make sure that it's scheduled, it's planned, it's something that they know is coming. They know what it means. They know what to expect. And we just did our first round. Actually, I've got a couple more that'll be their first time on Tuesday. And so we're going through that first round, and it's very simple, straightforward, very loose, conversational, so that they understand what my expectations are for this time. And it's on the schedule. It's planned out. There's a purpose in it, and it shouldn't be something that they look at as something that's scary because of the communication that's happened throughout the time here. Earlier, let's see. Life of Dan said, did we already talk about that one? Oh, this one. Time estimates are hard. I estimated 2 days on a recent issue, and it took a week. However, I communicated well through the process and gave regular updates, and all was well. That is very, very critical. Good comment, Dan. Um, you've got to communicate, and this goes back to kind of the example that I gave. If you worked 60 hours for 3 weeks and you said it was a 2 week thing, like there should have been communication through that process. Your manager should not find out 3 weeks later that you just put in 180 hours over 3 weeks on something that theoretically should have taken 80 hours. Is that right? 180, 60 hours times 300. Yeah. Okay. So something that should have taken 80 hours, you put 180 hours in. I'm not very good at math. So they need to be getting constant communication in that. As soon as you start hitting roadblocks, you need to be giving that feedback to your manager, to your lead, because you never know. They might actually be able to help you move some of those roadblocks. Maybe it's something that you got a roadblock you can hand off to them, and you can keep going on another piece of it. That should be part of the role of management, is helping unblock you from doing the work that you need to do. So you need to have that communication, just like Dan described. That's exactly the right way to handle that issue. When you can tell things are not going the way you expected, start communicating. This is where I'm not a huge fan of daily stand-ups, but if that is something that your company does, I would definitely lean into that for that specific purpose. Be very clear. Don't assume. So one of the things that we tend to do as developers is we don't want people to know how bad we are at what we're doing, and so we don't bring up the issues. We just figure we'll put more effort in, we'll figure it out, and sometimes what's needed is somebody else stepping in and unblocking you, and so we need to be willing to let that happen. Let's see. Ming says in his last role, the lead dev was in Vancouver, and he woke up at 7 a.m. Vancouver time. It's quite frustrating to get answers from him, which delayed my workflow and when problem solving. Yeah, so those are the things you got to figure out before you take the job. What's that communication going to look like? We're in different parts of the world. Is the expectation that I work on off hours for his benefit, or he works on off hours for my benefit? How do we handle that so that we have a plan and we work that plan and we do that successfully moving forward? Ming also said team structure is important. Feedback is essential. That's why I prefer larger established companies. No company is perfect, but having a plan and a structure for employees gives a sense of clarity. Absolutely. And that's the thing. As companies grow, you're going to hopefully find that they're adding a little bit more corporate stuff, which doesn't always feel nice, but in the end, there's a purpose for it, right? It helps provide efficiency. It helps provide better channels for feedback, hopefully. So, having established companies that have good processes in place, that would be my general recommendation, especially for junior developers most of the time. Dan says the only place I've worked at that had this much process was the place where I was the team lead. You were probably the one implementing it, right? Um, that's part of the problem, and companies typically do not have, um, especially smaller companies, are not good at having good processes in place. Sometimes we can even pride ourselves on not being corporate. I used that term a minute ago. Um, and this is something that we've struggled through even at the company that I work for. We have good processes for where we've been in the past. It's a smaller company, but we're starting to grow more, and as we're starting to grow, we do have to start implementing a few more rules and processes that feel very corporate, not flow and teamwork, things like that we kind of felt more in the past. But that stuff is necessary to help us do the job well and to do it efficiently and to do it together as a team. So Dan says, a startup I'm currently working at finally has more than just me working full time, so maybe we'll start to implement some processes. That's another reality too. If you don't have enough people for a process, again, that's that smaller versus larger. Sometimes processes are necessary because of the number of people, and you don't need a process. I think it's good to always have some sort of process, even if it's just you, even if you're just working freelance. Like, you should have some sort of process for how you manage your time and handle your feedback and your communication with clients and things like that. You need a process to step into, for sure. Dan also said on the time estimate comment, by the end, I was able to deliver more value in a week than I would have delivered in 2 days. So they were actually happier in the end, with the end result, even though it took longer. Yeah, and that often happens. Sometimes what happens is we get distracted by other issues as we're going, and that sneaks in. We have our own scope creep. Sometimes clients create scope creep, but sometimes we create our own scope creep too. But sometimes it's just a matter of, once you get into it, realizing that there's a better solution or a better way to do something. Again, that's where that communication comes in. If you get halfway through that week and you're like, or halfway through, day 2, and you're like, have this epiphany, this is not the way that we should handle this, even though that's what the client asked for. Let's talk to the client, pivot. This is going to be a better process for you long term. Yeah, it's going to take longer, maybe try to give another estimation, but at the end of the day, the client is ultimately going to be happy if things work better. And most clients, unless they're just super strapped with money and they just can't afford you to do it any other way, most clients are willing to pay the extra time to get a better product, especially if it's not like a massive thing. Now, if you came back and you're like, this is going to take a month to do, there's some more questions and conversations that need to happen there, right? But if it's just another couple days or to the end of the week or something like that, most clients are going to be happy with that, especially if you can articulate and demonstrate why this is going to be better for them, not just now, but long term, for their business too. So yeah, again, it all comes back to communication, right? It all comes back to, how do we communicate as a team? And a lot of these red flags really are, how does the company communicate their understanding of these different things that we're asking, right? So we kind of actually already hit on this last one. You're just talking with around what Ming was talking about with time zones. But number 8, last red flag for today, is that they have no remote plan. They have no remote plan. This is, some companies deal with this by just not hiring remote developers. And that actually is perfectly fine. That's not a red flag to me. If they say we don't hire remote developers, great, no problem. If I'm not willing to relocate, then it's not for me, right? That's not necessarily a red flag. The problem really comes around if they're hiring remote developers. One, if they're only hiring like one remote developer, or if they don't have a specific plan for remote developers. And again, you can ask this just like, what's the company's approach, or what's the company's policy for working with remote team members, and again, how do you handle that communication? And so we kind of hit on this earlier. What does that look like from a time management standpoint? What are the expectations? In Ming's case, what's the give and take from a time frame? When should I expect the team to be available? When should they expect me to be available? If they don't have an answer to that, like our answer is typically, we want people to be available 9 to 3, Monday through Friday, not counting holidays, obviously, but 9 to 3, Monday through Friday, so that any communication can be done between those hours. Does that mean communication doesn't happen any other time? No, it does happen other times, and that's fine. But the expectation is from 9 to 3 Central United States time, you need to be available so that we can communicate. Sometimes clients don't fit into that, and we can't enforce that with a client. And so, a lead or director, somebody like me, has to be on a phone call at times that they don't want to be on a phone call. That's part of their job expectation. That should be clarified. But for a junior developer, you need to know what the remote plan is, especially if you're coming in as a remote worker. Even if you're not coming in as a remote worker, you need to know, do they have other remote workers? If they do, where are they located? What's the communication plan, the expectation plan for availability and communication? What should the expectation be as far as how long between communication? If you're using something like Slack, like, should somebody be responsive and then within 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour? What does that look like, since we have these people working remotely, whether it's one person out in Vancouver or whether it's, all of our team is spread out all over the United States or all over the world? What are those expectations? Do you have a plan? If they say something like, well, all of our teams just figure out what works best for them, that is at least a yellow flag, if not a red flag. To some degree, that's okay. To some degree, teams need to have the flexibility to figure out what works best for them. But the company should have a policy and an understanding for everyone who joins the company, not just developers, but project managers, leads, directors, marketing people, salespeople, CEO, CTO, CFO, all these people. There should be expectations of when they're going to be available. HR department, I mean, if you got people working all over the world and you've got an HR department, people need to know when they're going to be available to answer questions, to get something changed on their 1099 form, or to get something changed on their W4, W2, I forget, whatever it is. But to get updates to their payroll settings, when are they going to be available? There needs to be a plan, and that needs to be something that should be very quick and simple to answer. But if they push that off on the teams, or if they don't really give you a solid answer, that's a huge red flag, because that means they're probably not actually managing that well, which means their communication internally is probably not managed very well. So they need to have a good organization. Just saying we use Slack to handle that is not a plan. That's not a plan. It's not a process. It doesn't help the company move forward. You might even, again, going back to implementing specifically for junior developers, you might follow up with something like, how do you ensure that remote junior developers stay connected and supported during this reality of being remote? And again, the answer, which is a correct answer and fine answer, might be, we don't hire remote junior developers. They have to be local. I think that's a fair response to that. That's not a red flag at all. Now, if they're saying they're hiring junior developers remotely and they're interviewing you and you're remote, then that's a red flag, because that doesn't make any sense. But I think it's good to call that out. If they're going to hire junior developers that are not there, that you can't turn around and ask a question to somebody in the office, how does that work? What is the expectation for how often they should communicate? What's the expectation for receiving feedback, receiving communication back from other people, specifically from mentors and senior level developers within the organization? That should just be very clearly defined. And if they can't articulate that in a paragraph or less of conversation, that's a red flag. That means they haven't really thought about it. They're just trying to build a team probably as quickly as they can, and they just figure they'll figure it out. We'll find the best thing that works. That's not a good answer. That is a red flag for that interview process. All right, let's see what we got going on here. Ming says, I don't like estimates because the CEO or client just doesn't know how development works and how complex some features are. Having to explain technical terms in layman's terms, that's the biggest issue. Can I just be honest with you, Ming? That shouldn't be your job. Your job should be to communicate what you know to your lead developer or to your director, or whoever it is, your CTO, if it's that small. A junior developer should not be the person who is interacting with the client. Almost ever. I can't think of any situation in my mind that you should be hiring a junior developer and expecting them to interact with the client, answering clients' questions. The person above you should know enough about development and should know enough about the project and should know enough about what you're doing and how long those things take in order to manage the expectations of the client. That is their job. It is not your job. Your job is to communicate reality and what you think is going to work or think is going to be the end result. A good manager is going to understand that you're a junior level developer. They're going to take every estimate that you give them with a huge grain of salt. They're probably going to double it or triple it, and they're going to communicate that to the client. Not because we're trying to be false to the client, but because we're trying to make sure that we give them a reasonable expectation. And if you're communicating problems along the way to your manager, whoever that is in the business, they should be then in constant communication with the client. I have heard, unfortunately, more than one time of companies where they start work and there's almost no communication after the initial process of figuring out what the client wants. There's no communication for 3 months, 6 months. And the client is just sitting there paying money every week, every 2 weeks, every month, and they're not seeing anything. They don't know how the process is going, and they just assume this is how development works because of these really terrible companies that they don't have a staging environment. They have nothing for them to actually see progress, other than maybe screenshots. Once in a while they'll send them some screenshots of where they're at with certain things. I mean, you can mock that up in a day. Doesn't mean you're actually building something out, right? So I forget where I was going with that. That's not your job. That was my point. That is not your job. Meaning, if you are coming in as a junior developer and being expected, that's a great question. What is your expectations? That's red flag number 9. What are your expectations of this junior role interactions with clients? If there is any expectation of you interacting with a client as a junior developer, that is a red flag. I would highly recommend you walk away from that unless you come from a background that is like project management, or you have some history in your life of working with clients, maybe in a different world, and you've just moved into development from that. That's probably the only time I can think of that I would trust a junior developer to be able to interact with a client and even give them that opportunity, let alone that responsibility. They would have to be somebody who's coming in from another industry or coming in from a different role, where they had that interaction and that skill set already. That is typically not true of most junior developers. So that's why I say that really shouldn't be your job. And if it is, then that's a huge red flag. Dan says, we have the developers doing the task, give the time estimate. Sometimes there's a bit of a back and forth with management, but a non-technical manager should not be setting hard time limits. Absolutely. A non-technical person should not be telling you when something should be done because they don't understand development. They don't understand what it looks like. They don't understand the potential pitfalls and the things that might take more time. Like I can talk to a developer and they can tell me how long something's going to take, and I can know they probably haven't thought through this piece of it yet. And so we might have that back and forth that Dan's talking about. We might have that conversation and that estimate grows, because they're not, or maybe there's something that they didn't know and it actually shrinks the estimate because they don't need to do something they thought they were going to have to do in that process as well. So that communication back and forth between the dev and management is really, really crucial to help solidify what is a reasonable time frame. And then even then, the management should be able to communicate that effectively to the client so that they understand, I'm not giving you a guarantee, right? There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee on the timeline, and there's no guarantee on the ROI, the return on investment. Just because you paid for this feature doesn't mean this feature is going to make you $1 million, right? Sometimes that happens. Sometimes clients get mad at developers because the thing they asked them to develop doesn't make them rich. It's just a reality. Doesn't mean you did anything wrong, but clients are clients, and sometimes I've been lucky enough, especially over the past few years, to work mostly with really good clients. Even projects that maybe didn't go as well as I wanted to, the clients were generally easy to work with, so that's nice. But you don't always get that, unfortunately. Dan says, we were looking to hire at our company recently. We wanted to hire a junior dev, but realized we couldn't because of our global remote work. It was sad because I love helping junior devs. You know, that was the one thing that kind of I really kind of spurred me on to starting this channel. Was the company that I work for, we don't hire junior devs. Not just because of remote reasons, but because we need to move quickly. We have certain standards and expectations of how we get work done, and right now it doesn't work well to hire junior devs. Now, that doesn't mean we will never hire junior devs. There may be an opportunity in the future, and this is something that I'm hoping someday we can do as we grow, to be able to implement a plan and a process to hire junior devs and bring them along. But at the moment, we're not in that position. So I'm right there with you, Dan. I would love to have some internal junior developers, but it just doesn't always work with the way the company is currently set up. So we do have to take that into account. Companies need to know what they're doing when they hire a junior developer, because it is just a different process than bringing in a mid or senior level developer. Yeah, especially remote like that. Like you're saying, they might be working when nobody else is available. That's one of those hard things where even if you did that, you'd probably, unfortunately, the junior dev would have to be somebody who would have to change their schedule and work at night or something like that in order to be available, and that's not always fun. Ming said, my first freelance role, I was given the responsibility to look after the client and deliver the project. Found it hard to communicate because I was new, plus my boss was always MIA. Yeah. And by the way, that's not freelance. Freelance is where you do everything yourself and you're in charge. That's just your first role. And that's a bad one. So yeah, I don't know, Dan, I don't remember. I know you've been here before, but I don't know how long you've been around. But Ming's gone through several of these similar type of issues where there's a hiring and then a firing not too long after that. And, I highly suspect it has very little to do with Ming's ability to do the job, or ability or desire to learn new things. It sounds like most of the time it's an issue with the hiring process. It's an issue of people being honest in the hiring process. And so hopefully, if you're finding yourself as a junior dev going into these, or even as a senior dev, I think most of these things are good red flags, even for senior level developers, maybe just tweaking some of it a little bit specifically around the senior role and asking those questions specifically around the senior role. Hopefully talking through these red flags, they make sense, they're applicable, and they can help you avoid some of the pitfalls of the interview process. Maybe even just help you get clarification, and even reveal sometimes if a company is being dishonest in their practices. I think some of these questions and things to look for can help you navigate. Remember, always ask more questions. Whenever a company says something and it's vague, or it's incomplete, or it doesn't seem like it really answers the question, ask more clarifying questions. If you ask more questions than them in an interview, maybe that's a red flag too. If they can't communicate some of these things just on their own, and you've got to draw it out of them, that might be red flag number 10. So look at that. We added 2 red flags. There you go. So, Dan says, that's awful. I've been working as a web dev for 10 plus years. Awesome. Started out in Joomla. Yeah, Joomla. Woo! That was the thing. Joomla and WordPress, baby. And now I use Elixir and Phoenix framework. And then you deleted it. What happened? Yeah, I didn't get to read the rest of that. Oh well, maybe you'll repost it. uh, yeah, that was my starting point. Was well, yeah, Joomla. The first website I ever built was with Joomla. Well, that's not true. So I did a very basic HTML class in my senior year of high school. That's how I even got into this in the first place. And we were using Front Page. Well, we used Notepad actually first, and then we did Front Page. And it is ancient. Yeah, Joomla is ancient. So we did Front Page, which is a Microsoft product at the time, and that was basically just HTML, really, at the end of the day. So that was my first website builder was Front Page, and then yeah, Joomla. Learning how to build websites. Once I understood what PHP was, and there was this whole like server backend thing, not just HTML. So I did that. That's all right, Dan. You use Vue.js on the front end now? Yeah, I use Vue. I prefer Vue over the others. Um, my stack right now is Laravel, and Vue, and sometimes with Inertia, just to handle some of the basic page stuff, depending on how verbose the application is that I'm working on. But yeah, Joomla and WordPress were the things back in the day, getting started from a full stack standpoint. But yeah, yep. Elixir and Phoenix. I've honestly never messed with Elixir or Phoenix. I'll have to look into that at some point. I know other people who do use it, but I'm more of a I'm still in the PHP world, with Laravel. Laravel's my jam. In fact, not I'm not presenting or anything, but if anybody happens to go to Laracon this year, I will be at Laracon with my company. That's July 24th through the 26th. No, 29th through the 30th. July 29th through the 30th is Laracon. It is expensive, but I've only been once, and I really enjoyed it. I wish I could have gone the second year, which was last year, but I had other things going on that I needed to be here for. But I am going. So if anybody happens to be watching this and they want to meet me at Laracon US in July, end of July, I will be there. So that'd be cool to meet anybody who happens to randomly watch this YouTube channel and find out I'll be at Laracon. So if you like Ruby, Elixir is similar, but in a functional language. I don't like Ruby, so nope. Just to be honest with you, I've only ever worked on one Ruby app. I didn't care for it. It's not wrong necessarily. It's definitely not my jam. So anyway, it is past the hour, 2 hours in. Thanks for jumping on, guys. I'm trying to be as consistent as possible now. Again, I do have some ideas for some standalone videos that I'm hopefully going to put out here in the next week or 2 or 3. There's that estimating process again, right? As long as I have time to get those out, I will. See, now you guys are just losing me with this functional junk. Uh, I'm OOP and proud of it. So, um, so I will try to get some more videos out this week, and we're trying to be a little bit more consistent. I am looking at potentially bringing back in the LinkedIn lunch live streams on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I will let everybody know when that does start back up. But trying to get some consistency built back up in the YouTube channel to be of a help to you guys more moving forward. So be looking for those things. I will let you know when they are available. And that's all I got for you. So thanks for hanging out, guys. I hope you have a good rest of your weekend. I've got to go do a lot of cleaning for people coming over, so not as fun, but hopefully you guys have a more fun weekend planned for yourselves. And I will see you all hopefully next Saturday. There is a Saturday coming up. I will not be here. Let me just make sure. I don't think it's next Saturday. I think it's in a couple. Well, where'd my calendar go? Let's see. Next Saturday is the 7th, and I will be out the 21st. No, the 28th. So we should have several Saturdays in a row where I'll be here. So hopefully be able to see you all and more consistently here over the next few weeks. And we'll enjoy it. So have a great weekend. Thanks again, everybody, for jumping in, for talking to me, making sure I'm not just talking to myself. I really appreciate it. I enjoy the feedback and the back and forth and sometimes the mockery of myself. So that's always good as well. So have a great weekend. I will talk to you all next Saturday.